Hey everybody, let's talk about informative speaking. There's two general types of speeches that people make in their lives. There's informative speaking and persuasive speaking. But first, we tackle informative speaking. Informative speaking is fantastic and one of the main speeches that you'll be doing in your careers. Sometimes you might be presenting your work to your larger team, or you might be presenting your larger team's work to the department. And this may sound scary, but it's not as scary as it sounds. And it can come with huge benefits to your career. Because typically, when you're presenting your team's work out to the larger department, not only is your boss there, but your boss's boss is there. And oftentimes your boss's boss's boss is there. So when you come up for promotion, they're going to remember your face. They're going to remember that you had the gumption to get out there and make that speech. It's going to leave a real positive impression. So let's take a look at some great aspects about public speaking as it pertains to informative speaking. So the first one we're going to look at is information versus persuasion. Where does one stop? Where does one end? We're going to look at different types of informative speeches. We're going to look at some general guidelines surrounding informative speeches, like what's better, what's, maybe something to avoid. And we're going to talk about tips for telling a story. You'll hear me say it, you'll hear me say it again. People love stories. Telling a story is super great, but we'll get more on that later. First, let's take a look at information versus persuasion. There's a fine line between telling someone a lot of information, a lot of important information, and trying to persuade them to take an action or change their mind. And it's one of the biggest things that a student can sometimes, have a problem with or have a bit of a struggle with at first. So let's clarify some of that for you. We have this cartoon of a gentleman here. And he says, today, I want to inform you regarding why you should destroy your ATM cards immediately. What do you think? Is this informative or is this persuasive? This gentleman is practicing persuasion. He's giving you information. You almost always have to give information to persuade people, but he's trying to get you to take an action. He's trying to get you to destroy your ATM cards. If he wasn't calling for you to destroy them, he might be telling you why you should destroy your ATM cards, or why you should believe this way about a bill that's coming up for vote, right? Does that make sense? Let's take a look at some smaller aspects to give us some rounded information. First, just give us the info. This person was started off on a great speech. Might want to give you some information regarding your ATM cards. Could even give you information regarding why your ATM cards could be dangerous or how susceptible they are to theft. One of the keys is to don't change people's minds. Just give them the info. Let them figure out what they would like to do. If you're making a speech to the larger department about what your team did, it's going to be kind of obvious that your team thinks they did the right thing. By the time you get to that point, just tell them the information that you came up with. Don't request an action. The same thing. This gentleman in this cartoon is requesting an action. Destroy your ATM cards immediately. We will talk a lot about requesting action when we do persuasive speeches. But right now, just tell us the interesting stuff. It sounds like this person probably has a lot of information that I would find interesting, considering I carry an ATM card everywhere I go. So there's lots of different types of speeches, and there's lots of different ways that we can present this information. So let's look at some types. We can have reports, where you just stand up and you tell an audience of whatever sort facts that you have. These are the facts of the case. This is how the economy's doing. This is how healthcare is doing. This is how a river dug the Grand Canyon. Just give us the facts. And this can be especially important for those of you going into the STEM fields as you go down the road. When you want to give a lot of information about, like, say, software programming, well, you can't give every detail, so you just give the facts, you report it in brief. Then, maybe another speech, or later in that speech, you can talk about explanations to give a deeper understanding. You might want to think about it as reports, facts tell you what is happening. The explanation tells you why it is happening. You can also have demonstrations. You can act something out. You might see this a lot on YouTube when people are showing how to do a dance, or how to make a salad, or how to change a headlight in your car. Essentially, these are informative speeches. They're just being done a little bit different because they're demonstrating it. Feel free to demonstrate a dance for us in your informative speech. That'd be fantastic. Audiences love that stuff. And speaking of things that audiences love, narratives, storytelling. Humans love storytelling. We think in stories. There's very, very few of us that actually think in bits of information and cold facts and numbers. And those people usually wind up gravitating toward mathematics or that type of field, and they do quite well for themselves. But most of us, we think in stories. We think about what happened and what it means to us and what was interesting about it. So tell us your story. A great informative speech I've heard before, a couple different ways, was someone telling a cultural story that tells the history of their culture. That's certainly socially significant, and if it's a proper length, it can be a really interesting way to give us your speech. But the most popular one, by far, is telling us the pros and cons, the comparison. They start off with, this is the subject matter. A new housing development is being built over by Highway 5, right on the beach. The pros of this housing development are XYZ. The cons are ABC. And those are your 3 points. Point 1, what's happening? The new housing development, where it's going. Point 2, the pros, what's good of it. And point 3, the cons, what's bad of it. So then all that you have to do at the end is to repeat what you told folks, give them your conclusion, which is the same as your introduction, and you're off. So let's look at some guidelines for informative speaking. There's a number of them, but not too many. One of them, obviously, is to be informative. Tell us what we do not know. This part is very important. Teach the audience something. Obviously, you can't make a speech about something that everybody in the audience is going to be ignorant of those facts. Someone is going to know what you're talking about. But if you're teaching the audience something new, you're giving them some new information, you're presenting to them a new story, you're going to be on the right track. And as always, we need to adapt to our audience. Our topic choice and knowledge base is going to depend on who's sitting in our audience. Remember our audience analysis section that we talked about a while ago? So we want to adapt to a topic that's interesting to this particular demographic, in this instance, usually college students, and their knowledge base, what you estimate they know about the subject matter already. And yeah, these are sort of, guesses and estimates, but if you put a little thought into it, you usually come up with the right answer. Another big one is to avoid information overload, the data dump. We hear about this a lot. I worked in tech, and we heard about it in tech all the time because we would hear 10-minute speeches that were rambling and giving us tons of information. We called it drinking from the fire hose. Like you wanted to drink water and someone opened up a fire hose for you. There's no way you could get all that information. So one of the things that's important as you're constructing and delivering your speech is think about your audience's perspective. How much of this are they really going to be able to remember? What are the big points? And just give us those. And then tell your story and tell it well. I always pretend I'm telling a kid. I have the fortune to spend a lot of time with a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they are fantastic. And when I'm telling a story, I just tell them, I tell my audience as though I'm telling it to the kids. I let my facial expressions really come alive. If I'm going to use nonverbals, I'm going to swing my arms like I'm walking. I swing them big, right? Things that a child would usually like. It feels uncomfortable until we get used to it while we're making a speech. I'll tell you that right up front. It feels a little weird. Sometimes it feels a little silly. What usually winds up happening is you feel like you're really overselling it, but from the perspective of your audience, it just looks great. It looks natural and it looks fun. And then one of the biggest guidelines, remember your conclusion. Most people, especially when they're learning this craft, and I was no different, we forget the conclusion. We have an excellent introduction. Everybody knows what our thesis, that is, main point is. We give them point 1, we give them point 2, we give them point 3, or we just tell a wonderful story, and then we go sit down and that's it. Right? You have to tell people what you told them. That's how it really gets cemented in the memory banks. Remember your conclusion. So before we go, let's take a look at some tips for telling a great story. There are 7 of them that I've assembled for you. There are probably a million of them, but I didn't want to do a data dump and give you too much information. So let's take a look at the first one. Choose a story that fits your audience. And that may seem somewhat obvious, but if you are really interested in history, be aware that maybe some of the surrounding facts of the story you want to tell us, not everybody in the audience knows. Right? Not everybody in the audience knows who Franz Ferdinand is. Yeah, if you don't, it's interesting. Go look it up. It's a cool band too. But choose a story that fits to the audience and how much they know and what their interests might be. Your story should fit your purpose. It should fit into the story or fit into your speech somehow. When we ask ourselves, why am I hearing this story? It should be somewhat obvious. Maybe not right off the bat, but by the time you get finished with your story, you should have connected it back to your subject matter. Your story should illustrate a key point. Like what I like to do is I always tell a story that sort of reinforces my thesis, and that way I can just tie it in with my conclusion. When I'm doing my conclusion and I mention my thesis, I mention my story, and it wraps it up in a neat little package for people. Your stories should be concise, as in they try to keep them clear, try to keep them short. Shorter is usually better. We want to give all the wonderful details. We love these stories, obviously. But lots of times, it comes off better to an audience when they have less details. And that way they can really think about and dig their teeth into the meat of the story. We should practice telling our story, which sounds kind of nonsense, or it sounds kind of sensible, and it is sensible. But lots of times we know the story so well, we forget about practicing it out loud and using good enunciation while we open our mouths and clearly tell people our story. And then finally, do not read your narrative. Please, this is public speaking, not public reading. Please don't read. There's more about that in the assignments. Oh, and one more thing that's kind of fun. As we talked before, be animated, even visual when telling your story. If you're telling a story and the character waves their arms over their head, wave your arms over your head. Even in this recording, you could probably hear that I'm moving around as I wave my arms over my head. It's somewhat fun, it's somewhat interesting, and it can really help your audience follow your speech. So today we've took a look at 4 good things to keep in mind when preparing and practicing our informative speeches. We want to teach the audience something new. We want to give them information versus trying to persuade them. We talked about the type of informative speeches, and we talked about some general guidelines to informative speeches. Other than that, remember, Speech making, public speaking in general, is way easier and way more fun when you relax and have some fun with it. I look forward to seeing your speeches soon.